Okay, welcome everyone to What's New in ForeFlight Dispatch. This is a special webinar we're doing for NBAA VBase 2020, in which we'll demonstrate some of the most recent impactful features in ForeFlight Dispatch that have arrived over the past few months, as well as give a brief introduction to what Dispatch is and what it can do for your operation for anyone who is new to Dispatch. So our presenters today are myself, Sam Taylor. I'm the Senior Content Marketing Specialist with ForeFlight. We also have Daniel Dahl. He's the Dispatch Lead Engineer based in Odense, Denmark. And we have Josh Pava, who is the Dispatch QA and Product Analyst. Josh, by the way, is also an active pilot. He flies a Challenger 605 and 650, and so he uses Dispatch for his planning and flying all the time. All right, so before we begin, just a couple housekeeping items related to the GoToWebinar platform that we're using for this webinar. You can ask any questions you want via the GoToWebinar message panel on the right. You just click that button that looks like a question mark, and it will open up the panel, and you can type in your questions and submit them. We'll be responding to as many questions as we can as you submit them during the webinar. So even though there is a Q&A portion at the end of this webinar, please don't wait until the Q&A portion to submit any questions you have. Feel free to submit a question as soon as it pops into your head, and we will try to answer it as best we can, as quickly as we can. We do highly recommend that you join this webinar from a computer, a desktop computer or a laptop computer, but not a mobile device like an iPhone or an iPad. We tend to find that people have more audio problems if they join from a mobile device. So if you are joining from a mobile device, there are some settings you might be able to tweak within the GoToWebinar interface on your device to get it working again, but we do highly recommend that you join from a computer. And finally, this session is being recorded, and it'll be accessible at foreflight.com/onfrequency later. So let's get started with a brief overview of ForeFlight Dispatch itself, what it can do, and who it's for. So Dispatch is a powerful component of ForeFlight Web that delivers next-generation, multi-user, schedule-to-mobile flight planning, resulting in greater efficiency and productivity for flight departments of any size. So a couple of key things to note from this short description. It is entirely based on ForeFlight Web. It's not a feature that is added to mobile like most other ForeFlight features are. It's entirely on the web. And one of the benefits of that is that you can use it from any modern internet browser. It's not restricted to iOS or anything. But one of the key features of Dispatch is that it allows your flight department to work together more efficiently. It sort of integrates many of the different parts of your flight department, such as your scheduling, your trip support, and your pilots. It helps bring them all together and helps them communicate on a shared platform. So moving into some of those particular aspects of Dispatch, you have the centralized flight status view. And this is one of the key features of Dispatch, which provides a single centralized place where you can view all past and present and future flights, whether they're planned, filed, or completed by anyone in your organization. So this is one of the really key features that allows anyone in your flight department to keep tabs on a flight, to edit a planned flight, to go in and file a flight. And it really just allows a much greater level of collaboration within your flight department. And after this, we'll look at a couple of other specific integrations that Dispatch supports, including the scheduling integration, the trip support integration, which is relatively new, as well as the integrated flight releases to ForeFlight Mobile. So first up, we have Dispatch's scheduling integrations. This is one of the key features of Dispatch that allows it to bring newly scheduled flights from your scheduling system directly into Dispatch. It does this via its scheduling API, which just automatically monitors all of the flights in your scheduling system. And as soon as you add a new one, it recognizes that and it pulls it into Dispatch along with all of the key information, such as the assigned crew members, the time and the date of the flight, the airports that the flight will be between, etc. With this integration, you can avoid the cumbersome task of having to copy and paste newly scheduled flights between different platforms or rely on email and other things to get that new flight from your scheduling system into your flight planning system. With this integration, Dispatch just does it on its own. You can see at the bottom of this slide some of our currently supported scheduling integrations with some of the more popular scheduling providers, and we are always looking at integrating with additional providers, so you can expect this list to grow in the future. Next up, we have Dispatch's trip support integration. And this is a relatively new addition, which is in many ways just as powerful as the scheduling integration. What this allows you to do is, if you have a designated trip support provider, such as Jeppesen ITPS or Honeywell, and those are the two that we currently support, you can see them at the bottom, but we will also support additional providers in the future. If you have a contract with one of these trip support providers, you can give them access to log in to your Dispatch account directly, just the same way that one of your existing flight planners or pilots could, and they can then work directly with those flights alongside your own staff. So what they see when they sign into Dispatch is exactly the same as what one of your own flight planners would see when they sign into Dispatch. And they have special access that allows them to work in Dispatch, but not necessarily mess with other parts of your organization or your ForeFlight account. So it's a rather restricted access to only Dispatch, and it allows them to support you in the exact same platform that you use to plan every day. Another key benefit that ties into the next integration we'll talk about is the fact that trip support providers can easily upload flight documents directly to crew members via this integration. Because Dispatch can deliver flight documents straight to ForeFlight Mobile, this means that if your trip support provider is the one who usually works up a flight itinerary, a passenger list, all of these key documents that you need for every flight, rather than having to rely on email once again, like we said with the scheduling integration, this means that they can simply go into Dispatch, drag and drop the files onto the flight, hit a button, and then those files are immediately delivered to the pilot's iPads and accessible right in ForeFlight Mobile. So it's an incredibly easy and tight integration that just allows you to take out many of the cumbersome steps that would slow down this process before Dispatch. And now lastly, we have the integration with ForeFlight Mobile, the integrated flight releases. Like I said, Dispatch integrates seamlessly with ForeFlight Mobile, so even though Dispatch itself is confined to just the web application, it does integrate directly with ForeFlight Mobile. And so as part of your flight planning, you can assign flights to designated crew members, and then once you release the flight, that flight immediately appears in ForeFlight Mobile in the flight's view, and it looks and behaves almost exactly the same as it would if the pilot had planned the flight themselves on their own iPad. And so once again, rather than having to deal with emailing flight plans or relying on phone calls and other ways of updating the pilots with new flight information, you can just hit a button and the flight will immediately appear on their iPad. So especially if you're an operation that is already using ForeFlight Mobile for some of your flight planning or perhaps in-flight use, this is an integration that is just out of the box, completely seamless. The other aspect of Dispatch, besides the collaboration aspect, the ability for it to integrate many of your different components of your flight department onto a single platform, is the fact that Dispatch provides truly advanced flight planning. It goes above and beyond the level of flight planning that you get with ForeFlight Performance or ForeFlight Business Performance on the iPad, and it adds many new additional capabilities, very powerful flight planning capabilities that are only accessible via Dispatch. And some of them you can see here on the screen. We do support ETP and ETOPS only in Dispatch, and so you can set up an oceanic flight and set up those diversion airports and diversion scenarios right in Dispatch. And we do support many other more advanced capabilities than what you would get just with ForeFlight Mobile. So part of what we'll look at today are some of the new features involved in this advanced flight planning, as well as other just nice to have features that really will enable you to customize dispatch for your own operation and further empower your pilots with new capabilities that are especially suited to the way that your flight department operates. One thing to note before we jump into the new features, this webinar is not intended to be a comprehensive overview of using dispatch. We're going to skip over most of the basics of the interface and the basic capabilities, since we're going to be looking simply at the newer capabilities. So if you are new to dispatch and you haven't seen what it can do, I highly recommend you go back and watch some of the previous webinars we've done on dispatch in the past, and those really start from the beginning and walk you through the entire interface and the entire process of creating a new flight, editing flights, and releasing flights. You can watch that webinar at foreflight.com/dispatch-webinar. All right, so to kick off our demonstration of some of Dispatch's newer features, I'm going to start with our locked versus unlocked flight releases feature. This is something we recently introduced, which allows you to release flight plans to crew members in either editable or non-editable states. Now, normally in ForeFlight Mobile, when a pilot creates a flight on their own account, it's always editable, of course, because they created it and they can edit it however they want. But there are certain instances in which a flight will be locked to editing, such as if a pilot shares one of their flights with another pilot, that other pilot cannot edit the details of that flight. And when we first introduced ForeFlight Dispatch, all flights released from Dispatch were like that, where the pilot who received the flight plan could not make any edits to it. Those edits had to be made within Dispatch. And so what we changed was we added the ability to choose whether or not you want a flight to be released as editable or non-editable by the crew members. So what I have here is just a simple flight plan in the US. I'm going to go ahead and collapse the sidebar over there. I'm going to go ahead and save the flight. And this will bring up the release option. And this is what will allow me to release the flight plan. So you can see I have myself and Daniel as the two crew members. And when I go and hit release, what will happen is you have these two options. One is release as editable. And so if you choose this option, then myself and Daniel can both make edits to the flight plan once it arrives on our iPads. There is also this other option, which you can see right now is actually not, it's something I can't choose, and I'll explain that in just a minute. But if I were to choose this option, if I could choose this option, then you would release the flight as read-only. And like I said, that would mean that myself and Daniel could not make any edits to the flight on our mobile devices. We would have to go in and pull up the flight on Dispatch, make the relevant changes, and then save it. Now, the other key aspect of this feature is that as the admin of a Dispatch account, you can decide whether you want your flight planners to be able to release flights as editable or non-editable. You can lock the option to one or the other. And so some operations might want both of these to be available. There may be some cases where you want a pilot to not edit a flight plan. There may be some flights where you do want them to be able to edit it. But if you know exactly how your organization needs to operate and you don't want pilots being able to edit flight plans, then as the admin, you can actually go to the dispatch settings. You can go to dispatch settings and you can change this feature to dispatchers can change the default release mode. This is the setting here that determines whether the flight planners, the dispatchers using dispatch, are able to change the default release mode. So in this case, they cannot. And so all flights will be editable. But if I were to change it to this, now as a flight planner, I can actually choose which of these I want to use. When I go to release, now both of these are selectable. So Daniel and Josh, are there any key points that you want to bring up related to this feature? Like maybe is there any feedback that you've heard in response to us releasing this?
Yes, thanks, Sam. Customers have been really grateful that Dispatch is now able to release flights in editable mode, meaning it will support the self-serve or self-filing workflow that some flight departments do much better. Another thing worth noting in the read-only editable mode is that sometimes flights is forced into a read-only state. That happens if dispatchers use certain features that is not yet available on ForeFlight Mobile. And for example, ETP is a good example. If a flight uses ETP airports, the flight will be automatically pushed into a read-only state when released to the pilots. We do that to make sure that fuel burn numbers and nav logs stay consistent in ForeFlight Mobile and is not changed around by features not supported yet. When the feature is supported on ForeFlight Mobile, the mode will be able to be editable again in the future. So that's a nice way of supporting a more advanced feature on ForeFlight Dispatch, but still releasing the flight to the pilot, being able to see it and send it to the maps and fly it afterwards.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Great point. And actually, another recent feature that we added that is related to what we're talking about here is something called automatic flight releases and flight refreshes. So not only can a dispatcher manually release a flight to the pilots whenever they want to, you also have this ability if you go to, once again, to the dispatch settings and you go to automation, you have these two groups of settings. And this allows you, first of all, it allows you to automatically release flights to pilots at a certain set time before the flight is set to depart. And so in this case, if auto release is enabled, then that means that the flight will release automatically. And you can set the hours prior to departure that the flight will release here. So here we have it set to 24 hours, meaning 24 hours before that planned ETD, dispatch will just automatically release the flight plan to the pilots, and it will automatically appear on their mobile devices so that they can view it. And if it's set to editable flight releases, then they can work with it as well. The other key aspect, or the other key feature setting that we have in this view is especially relevant to flights that are released as not read-only, or as read-only rather, so that they are locked and the pilots and crew members who receive the flights cannot make any edits to them. And these are the auto refresh settings. So this is an issue that came up early on where if you release a flight plan, perhaps 2 days in advance of the flight, unless someone went in and made a change to the flight plan or manually hit the refresh button, then the flight data would not refresh. And that means that by the time the flight came around, you would have slightly stale briefing data, you would have slightly stale wind data. So of course, that's something you don't want to make sure that your flight is as accurate as possible before you take off. So we added this auto refresh setting, and this allows you to say, automatically refresh your flight data, including the briefing, the nav log, and any of the performance calculations. And this will refresh once every hour from the time that you first save the flight to the set time down here. And so in this case, we say stop refreshing the flight only 1 hour before departure. But in some cases, you may want to say, well, actually, I'd rather stop refreshing the flight 4 hours before departure, because I want to make sure that if the pilots and crew members have already started printing their briefing and their other documents, that we're not then refreshing the flight further after that. So this is a really useful setting. Both of these settings are very useful in combination with those flight release capabilities. Do either of you have any comments on these?
I think it's worth mentioning the auto refresh occurs on both, whether it's read only or whether it's read write. So you can pretty much count on when you pull up your ForeFlight Mobile, as long as you have auto refresh enabled, you're always going to have the latest data available, weather, nav log, etc.
Yeah, that's an excellent clarification because, of course, pilots can manually refresh the flight data within ForeFlight Mobile. There's a refresh button near the top of the flights view that you can tap to automatically refresh the flight data. But, of course, in the case where the flight is released as read-only, that manual refresh is actually not available for the pilots. So it will automatically refresh in both cases, but in the case of a locked flight release, it is especially important for them to get that updated information. So next up, we're going to take a look at another enhancement that you can make another enhancement that we recently made with the load planning on different flights. And you can see right here is where you can enter the load information. So you can enter the number of people, the average weight of each person, and the total weight of all the cargo. And then you have this use max load button here, which will just automatically add weight to the cargo section until it reaches the maximum. Now, this is the old way of doing it. And what we've done is we've added this specific button. So see, you can switch between simple and specific load. And when you switch to specific, it gets much more fine-grained and much more detailed. What it does is it's breaking out that simple, number of people and the average weight for all the people, no matter who's on the flight, breaks that out into different categories. So you can see you have categories for pilots, cabin attendants, males, females, children, infants, and then once again, cargo. And this is really useful because now you can enter a specific number for each one of these. So you can see that it will automatically, the pilots and the cabin attendants numbers are automatically taken from the crew over here. And so if I add a cabin attendant, then it should automatically add them here. There you go. And I've exceeded my payload, so I'll go ahead and remove Alex. And then for the rest of these, of course, you can simply add these to increase this. I'll go ahead and set this back to 0. Get rid of that warning. There we go. So these weights are also something you can automatically, or there's something you can manually change for each flight if you want to. However, there are settings that determine what the average weight will be for each of these categories of person. So if I go back to the settings view over here, I go to planning settings, I scroll down to here, you have both of the weight sections. So you have the simple people planning, and this is where you can specify an average weight for everyone. But with specific people planning, this is where an account admin using dispatch settings can go in and change what average weight they want to use for each type of person here. And these will automatically be applied to every single flight. But as you saw, it is possible to change those manually with each flight. The other great benefit of this is that we do allow this information to be imported using the scheduling API. So if your scheduling system supports sending this information, and not all of them do, we have a couple current scheduling integrations that will send this information, and hopefully more of them adopt it. But if your scheduling system does support sending this via the ForeFlight API, it will send the number of people in each of these categories and also the average weight in each of these categories. Next up, if you just scroll down a little bit more on the flights view and you look at the routes section here, you'll find Procedure Advisor. And anyone who has used ForeFlight Mobile has probably used Procedure Advisor before, especially if you're flying IFR flights and you need to put in departure and arrival procedures and approaches. And so what we've done here is we've taken Procedure Advisor and adapted it to dispatch with just a few tweaks that will make it more suitable for the planning use case, the dispatcher use case that this product has. So you just click on this. Of course, you have to have your departure and destination airports in there. You don't have to have any other parts of the route entered, but in this case we do, and that's fine. So you can see you have the map here, and on the left, you can switch between looking at the SIDS and the stars for each of the airports. And so like in ForeFlight Mobile, we give you some information here about the types of aircraft that are allowed to use each of these procedures. And we do this for both the SIDS and the stars. One thing to note is that the Procedure Advisor in Dispatch does not have approaches because since you're not going to be using this during a flight, there's no use putting in an approach, and you can't file a flight plan with an approach in it to begin with. So it's just the departure and arrival procedures here. You can click on any of these to select them, and it'll automatically populate that procedure on the map. And if you look below these tables, you have the en route transition options. And so you can switch between using either no transition or any other transitions that are available with that procedure. One other thing to note here is that we do show ATC only procedures. And so these are procedures that only ATC can assign, and that's why they're not selectable. You can see there's no button to select them, and they don't light up when I put my cursor on them. But you are able to view the procedure just to get a sense of what it looks like in case that is assigned to you. And with any of these procedures, you can click the chart button, and it will open up the actual procedure chart for that aircraft just as a PDF within your web browser. Josh, do you have any comments to make on this? Do you use this feature fairly often?
I do use it pretty often when I'm planning flights. Where I find this to be most useful is when there are multiple procedures that span the same general area. It allows me to get a visual on which direction I want to come in from, whether I prefer more southerly fix or northerly fix, for example. And I find it quite useful.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of times the ForeFlight recommended route will automatically give you a good sit and a good star, so it's not always necessary to open a procedure advisor and find a different one. But as you said, if ForeFlight gives you something and you'd rather have a procedure coming from a different direction, then this is a great tool to easily enter that.
Yeah, and what I find most useful is to be able to envision the transitions as well. Like we can see here, we have Flagstaff and LJ and Kidder. It's just sort of nice to be able to visualize exactly where this procedure is able to take me or where I'm able to come from to join a star.
Exactly, yeah. So once you have both of the selections made, you just click Apply at the bottom, and it will add that procedure into your route. So next up, we're going to take a look at something that's up here in the ATC Data tab. So normally the ATC Data tab is this is where you go once you've entered all of the significant flight details about your flight. And before filing it, you can come here and make changes to the flight plan itself, the way it will be handled by ATC and various other things. So you can ensure that the type of flight is set correctly. You can add any remarks. You can fill in any of these other information fields. A lot of these are the same as the fields that you have access to within ForeFlight Mobile, either within the flights view or sometimes in the aircraft view near the filing codes. You have the option to enter some codes like these. One of the great things about the ATC Data view is that you can manually change the AFTN addresses. So this isn't so much a concern if you're simply filing within the US, but if you're filing internationally, this can often be a very important way of making sure that the flight plan is properly delivered to all of the different AFTN addresses along the flight. But in this case, what we're going to be looking at is this section here, the flight watchers. And so this allows you to add people to be notified about a flight who are not actually pilots on the flight and may not even be part of your organization. So you can just click Add Watcher here. And now when you file the flight plan, any notifications related to the flight plan will be delivered to that email address. This is a great way of notifying anyone who's not a crew member on the flight, but who has a need to know basis to get information about these flights. Daniel or Josh, does one of you want to provide any examples of someone who might be added as a flight watcher?
I think a good example of this, using this feature, is to add, for example, the actual dispatcher that's dispatching the flight here, because that will enable them to receive any notifications such as expected routes.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, since unless the person who set up the flight within dispatch is one of the crew members, by default they wouldn't be notified of any of this stuff. So yeah, that's actually a really good use case.
Yeah, and I think with the AFTN addressing, I think what's useful about that is oftentimes I've seen NOTAMs that come out on pretty short notice saying, add this address for your flight plan. So it's very handy to be able to go into the ATC Data tab and enter a new AFTN address so you can send your flight plan upon filing.
Yeah, also a great point. And that's one of the key features about Dispatch that is not at all available in ForeFlight Mobile. So if you're the kind of flight planner who is going to be messing around with the AFTN addresses and that sort of power user, then Dispatch is absolutely the product you'd need for that. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this person because that's not actually a real email address. And we're going to go ahead and jump back to the flights view for a quick look at another capability we recently added. You'll notice that both of these can be expanded and collapsed. So this is the performance table. This has been here for a while, and it just allows you to see all of the detailed performance information about each flight. But just below the performance table is the flight advisories. And you see that we have two items here, and even if it's collapsed, that red banner is there to let you know that there's something you need to see. And so in this case, the flight advisories is telling us that there is a runway closed NOTAM at our departure airport, and there is a runway closed at one of our alternate airports. So these are the types of NOTAMs that will appear in this flight advisory section. Really critical NOTAMs that you absolutely need to know about because it could impact how you plan the flight or whether the flight can be conducted at all. So you can then click on NOTAMs here, and it will show you all of the NOTAMs for that airport. Some other things that can appear within flight advisories are, for example, if there is expected to be low IFR weather at your departure or destination or any of your alternate airports, then that will appear here. And instead of a NOTAMs button, you'll have a weather button, and you can open that up and see essentially the TAF or the METAR for that airport. But this is something we've also done sort of analogously within ForeFlight Mobile, where we have put some of these notification banners in many different places during the flight planning process, just to make sure that you're aware of these really important pieces of information. It's really impossible to miss them if they come up on your flight.
I think for flight advisories, it also covers ETP airports, which is quite handy because oftentimes I know when I'm planning a flight involving ETPs, the airports are a little bit of not so much an afterthought, but they're not something that I focus on all that much. So when I'm looking at these airports, it's easy for me to go under flight advisories and see what NOTAMs cover the ETP airports, rather than having to go into a briefing, for example, and read those NOTAMs.
Yeah, great point, Josh. All right, so we've only got a couple of additional features to talk about here, but both of them are some of the most popular features that Dispatch has and some of the most powerful. So to get there, I'm going to go into settings. Oh, and I need to stay and save my flight first. There we go. If I go over to Dispatch settings, I go to operational rules. Now this is a feature that we have had since Dispatch launched, but it's something that we've been gradually building on and enabling more capabilities so that different flight departments can really customize Dispatch to their own operation. So the way that operational rules work is you have a list of different rule types here, and these are all of the different categories of rules that you can add, and it really allows a huge amount of flexibility in terms of automating certain decisions about flight plans. So for example, if I select fuel policy here, this allows me to automatically apply a specific fuel policy based on certain criteria. So in this case, it automatically selects extra fuel, but I can go ahead and select landing fuel, which is another popular fuel policy, and say I'm going to put in 7,000. So now this means that any flight plan that satisfies the criteria that I define over here will automatically have the fuel policy set to landing fuel 7,000. So a great example of this would be if I put in Teterboro as the destination airport, and I put in a tail number that I want to use this with. And now what this means is that anytime I plan a flight into Teterboro with that tail number, it will automatically set the fuel policy to 7,000 pounds of landing fuel. And then you just have to say add rule. And now the operational rule is added, and you can see it here at the bottom of this table. One thing to note with this table is that you can filter the types of rules you're looking at, so you can view all of the rules, or you can just filter them down to any particular kind of rule. And this is really important because for a flight department that is making really active use of these operational rules, you're going to have a whole lot of them most likely. And so it really helps to be able to filter it based on the type of rule. But this is an example of once you dig into these different types of rules and really start using these, it enables a huge amount of flexibility in terms of automating some of these flight planning decisions and just making sure that all of the planners on your account are following these and not just making their own decisions every time. Josh, do you want to maybe expand on that example that I did with the fuel policy?
Yeah, for sure. Like your example was landing fuel policy is a great one. I also, departing some airports, for example, the Middle East, where you may not want to fly over some FIRs, you can say either via tail number or departure airport or destination airport, hey, I don't want to fly over this FAR when I'm departing perfect Dubai. Then when we go there, now we can choose exactly. So we can choose the FAR to avoid, and we simply add that rule. And now every time we're departing Dubai, we're going to avoid the selected FIR or FIRs.
Yeah, one thing to note about operational rules is that it is possible for a flight planner to override them within the flight itself. So for that, for this example, avoiding Iran, if someone was planning a flight and they put this in as the departure airport, it would automatically apply this avoid FIR within the route builder, but that planner could go in and change that and remove that restriction if they wanted to. But the key with the operational rule is that it applies it automatically so that the flight planner has to take positive action to go and change that behavior, which just ensures that you can set it up to be the way you want it to be, and your flight planners don't have to remember all of these particularities for every single flight that they're planning.
I think noteworthy is that you're not limited to just one operational rule per flight. So if there are 4 operational rules that meet the qualification that you've set up, they will all be applied to a single flight.
That's right. Another thing to notice is that you can set up these operational rules per aircraft type. So if you want all your Gulf streams to have a default fuel policy of landing fuel 6000, you can just specify landing fuel 6000 and then put the Gulf stream in the aircraft type. So that would be GLF 6, for example, or GLF 5. That would be applied to all aircrafts of that type, which is quite useful. So you don't have to manage one operational rule per tail number, but rather do it per fleet type instead.
Yeah, and as I said, we've been gradually expanding the number of rule types, and as Daniel just said, the ability to add additional criteria with the addition of the aircraft type. So you can expect that we will continue to add additional operational rules just to further expand the flexibility that Dispatch has in terms of regulating how your flight planners are building your flights. All right, so last up here, we have actually one of the biggest recent features we've added in the past couple of months, and that is the Nav Log Builder. As you can see, I'm still in the Dispatch settings view here, and so you just come over here to the right and you click on Nav Log Builder. Some of the most common feature requests we get from flight departments using ForeFlight and using Dispatch is that they want to be able to customize ForeFlight's Nav Log. Currently, we have 2 just regular pre-built layouts, and those, you can see them here, the international layout and the standard layout. So normally, if you're just using ForeFlight Mobile, those are the only 2 options you have. But of course, every flight department is different, and many of them want to be able to rearrange the order of information or the kind of information that their pilots are going to be looking at when they've printed out their nav log and are referring to it during the flight. So what the Nav Log Builder allows you to do is take total control over the information in the nav log. It's a fairly complex tool, and I will have a tutorial video coming out in the next couple of weeks describing exactly how to do this and really diving into the details of it. But essentially, you can just see from looking at it that you have all of these different blocks. And so we take all of the information that would be included in a nav log, and we give it these blocks, and you can move them around to fill the available space. You can add new blocks like this. You can go in and select the type of information block that's going to be added. You can change some of the labels relating to each block so that you can move this information around. And you have some options when you're editing a given custom nav log in terms of being able to undo changes you made or clear the entire thing. Go ahead and undo that. And you have this compact option. And so this means that there's actually nothing to compact right here, but let me try doing this. Go to compact. Yeah. So essentially, if you have a lot of empty space within your nav log, that option will just automatically move all of the modules closer together and get everything fitting a bit more tightly. Daniel, do you want to add something about this custom nav log builder?
Yes, Sam. So the custom Nav Log Builder allows you to create, for example, a nav log with your company logo on it. You can also customize the amount of space you have on the nav log for notes and so on. So it's a very powerful tool that allows you to, in the web browser, see what your nav log actually looks like. So if Sam hits the preview button, we actually load an example of that nav log, how it should look like once generated on the iPad or on Dispatch. So it's a very versatile tool for creating a nav log that suits your operation.
Yeah, and I think Daniel hit an important point, is that these nav logs will also work on ForeFlight Mobile. So it's not simply a feature that must be used within Dispatch. Once they're created within Nav Log Builder in Dispatch, they will also populate into ForeFlight Mobile.
Another important thing is you can set this nav log across all pilots in the company. So you are able to assure compliance with a certain nav log type for all your pilots.
I think I hear quite often that, like Daniel alluded to, people would like more space to write clearances or an ATIS or what have you. So Sam, if you wouldn't mind scrolling to either the clearance or the ATIS section on the Nav Log Builder, and then we simply click the three lines on the right-hand side of it. I think it's above. There you go. The three lines, and we see customize, and we can say 5 lines, for example. And now when we generate a nav log, there'll be a little bit more room. There'll be 2 extra lines compared to our default nav log to write that ATIS. And people tend to find that pretty handy to have some more space.
Yeah, that's a great example. And that was actually one of the key reasons that we introduced the so-called international nav log to begin with, is that people wanted more space to write some of that information. So the international nav log provides more of it. But of course, if you want even more space, or if you want to rearrange the order of the information within that nav log, you can, for example, start with this layout, and I'll discard my changes here, and you can then work from here and make whatever changes you want. So this is one of the nice benefits of this, that you're not necessarily only starting from scratch. Of course, if you want to do that, then that's an option, but you do have the option of loading these pre-built layouts and then modifying them as you see fit. So like I said, I'll have a more in-depth tutorial about this capability coming out in the near future. So make sure you're paying attention to our YouTube channel to see when that becomes available. So with that, we'll start wrapping this up. Just a few things to note before we move into Q&A. You can learn more about Dispatch at foreflight.com/dispatch. And we are also offering a free trial of Dispatch, which you can sign up for at foreflight.com/dispatch-trial. That is a trial that is for existing business customers, ForeFlight business customers. So if you don't already have Dispatch, you can automatically get set up with it. It's a 30-day free trial, and you can start it right away. If you're not a current ForeFlight customer, you can also go to foreflight.com/dispatch-form, and you can fill out a form to let us know about your operation and eventually get a live demo with one of our sales team members. If you're watching this webinar at NBAA VBase 2020, please feel free to stop by our booth and you can chat with any of our booth members. Our sales team will be hosting live demos during the event, and so feel free to get in touch with them. Or you can contact them directly at sales@foreflight.com. And of course, if you want to sign up for more webinars in the future, or if you want to watch previous webinars that we've recorded, you can watch all of those at foreflight.com/onfrequency. So let's move on to some questions. So I will point out actually that if you want to register for any of the other webinars we are putting on for VBase this year, you can actually go to foreflight.com/NBAA. And from there, you'll find links to register for the 3 webinars that we're hosting tomorrow, or 2 webinars rather, and a happy hour event in the afternoon with ForeFlight's founders. So we only got a few questions here, not too many. So we'll just run through a few of them and call it a day. So first up here, any plans to allow custom Nav Log usage on mobile? Josh, do you want to talk about the details of how that works?
Yeah, sure. So as we saw in the webinar, we do have the custom Nav Log Builder, which allows you within ForeFlight Dispatch to modify any of our existing nav logs to better suit your operation. Change the order, change some of the fields and the names, etc. And those nav logs will also be available within ForeFlight Mobile. So as long as you are a Dispatch user and you've set up a default nav log within Dispatch, you'll also have that nav log in ForeFlight Mobile.
All right, next question. Will the ETP and alternate routing transfer to mobile? I recall seeing an error on that. So a slightly similar explanation to the nav log. Josh, do you want to handle that one?
Yeah, for sure. So I think most likely what this user saw is they went to release a flight and they were told that either the flight is using an ETPs, ETP airports, or there is an alternate routing specified to one or more of the alternates. And Dispatch was prompting that user whether they want to release the flight as read-only. And which in this case, that is your only option because ForeFlight Mobile doesn't at this time support alternate routing or ETPs. However, what you can do, like we talked about earlier, is release the flight as read-only and rely on the auto refreshing capability that we have within Dispatch that will also push to any connected ForeFlight Mobile. So you'll always have, current nav log briefing as well as current ETP information. So everything is typically calculated up to the default 1 hour before departure.
All right, next up. I'm trying to switch our pilots to use ForeFlight with jet plates instead of the Jeppesen flight deck app. However, the current pricing requires a separate subscription for each of these 2 apps on the same mobile device. So this makes the transition too cost prohibitive to consider. So this was a really great question, and obviously this is a problem that anyone who's currently using JetFD might encounter if they want to go through a transition period where their pilots are using both JetFD and ForeFlight with jet plates at the same time, since you only have a certain number of seats or license tokens on your account. And of course, each one of those apps will take up one of those seats, even if they're both on the same device. So it's a really legitimate question of, how can someone do this without having to pay for double the amount? And the answer is that we do have ways of making this transition easier for a flight department who's trying to move to ForeFlight. Obviously, since we're part of the same Boeing family now, ForeFlight can work with Jeppesen to work out an arrangement that can simplify this. And so if you're thinking about moving to ForeFlight, but this is one of the hurdles that you're feeling intimidated by, feel free to reach out to one of our sales team members at sales@foreflight.com, and they can discuss the situation with you and possibly work with your Jeppesen representative to work out an arrangement where we can make that easier for you. But definitely don't look at that issue and assume that it's just going to be impossible to make the switch, because we have helped out previous operators with that issue before. So a couple of questions did come in during after we started the Q&A, so I'll answer a couple of those. Is there a plan to allow pilots to fill in the nav log on ForeFlight Mobile, which can then be saved? So this is interesting, because it's true that if you're simply viewing the nav log within the regular nav log section of the app, you can't just tap on the fields and enter things there. But I believe what you can do is, if you tap the Send To button in the top right corner of the screen, there should be an option to send it to ForeFlight Documents. And if you tap that option, it will send it to the Documents view. It will send it specifically to the imported drive in Documents, so it doesn't send it to your cloud documents or the ForeFlight drive. It's specifically the imported drive. But once there, then you can go into that document, you can open it up, and you can annotate it within Documents. So you can use all of the annotation tools that you would normally use with other documents to annotate the nav log. So that's a nice workaround to work on the nav log. Of course, we would like in the future to allow the nav log to be edited directly, but we don't have any timeline for when we'll be able to support that right now. Josh, was there anything you wanted to add to that? Any kind of strategies that you have for filling out nav logs?
Sam, you're exactly right. And how you just described it is how I maintain our master documents when going across the ocean. And I find that it works quite well. You're able to add text to it. You can use Apple Pencil annotations. And then, like you said, they're saved right within ForeFlight Mobile. If you like to, at the end of the flight, you're also able to send that document to the flight, so it'll be retained within the files section of the flight. And how you described works very, very well. And I would suggest others try it as well, because it's something I hear fairly often, that question. And once people, once the users try it for their first time, they say, oh, wow, this is great. I really like it. I didn't know we could do that.
Exactly. It's always worth checking the Send To menu when you're looking at any kind of resource in the app, because a lot of times there are things in there that can be very helpful. Like, and this is just kind of an aside, but by the way, if you're using a Scratchpad within the Scratchpad view, we recently added an option to send it to a flight. So if you have a Scratchpad for that and you're using it on a particular flight, you tap the Send To button for Scratchpad, and one of the options is Send To Flights. And when you tap that, you can select from your entire list of flight plans to then send that flight and attach it to that flight plan. So another little hidden Send To feature that can really help you organize your Scratchpads and attach them to the appropriate flight. All right, next question here. What is the estimated timeline for integration with Flex? The estimated timeline is right now, because we do already have a scheduling integration with Flex, between Flex and Dispatch. And so if you use Flex for your scheduling, definitely a good idea to get started on a Dispatch trial and get that integration started and see how it works. Let's see. All right, I think this will be the last question right now. Let's see, if the times, the out, off, on, and in times are entered in a flight on mobile, can those times be accessed in Dispatch? So not right now. As of right now, if you put in those times, they're confined to the flight itself, but we are working on adding that in the future, so stay tuned. All right, so that's a wrap for today. Thank you everyone for joining. Like I said, if you're going to be, whether or not you're an NBAA member and you're going to be attending any of the other events, you can sign up for any of our webinars tomorrow and the happy hour with the ForeFlight co-founders. So just go to foreflight.com/NBAA and just scroll down the page and you can find registration links for those other events. And of course, if you are part of NBAA and you're attending the virtual event this year, please stop by our booth and you can chat with any of our booth members and sales team members. Obviously, if you have any questions about Dispatch, feel free to email sales@foreflight.com and they can answer all of the questions you have. So thanks everyone, and we'll see you on the next webinar.